For those who don't know me, I'm Alan C. Pennington, and Exarion universe players hate me. Using this one weird trick, I became a major figure in the Yu-Gi-Oh! GOAT format community by convincing virtually the entire community of this game to change a key rule of their game almost overnight. So jokes aside, I managed to accomplish this exactly 5 years ago by posting an essay called A Treatise Regarding Exarion Universe. And there's a link to that in the description. This essay went on to be read by tens of thousands of people, and is typically the first thing that gets cited when people ask why we play without Exarion Universe in Go format. So recently, this debate has resurfaced again, so I thought it would be a good opportunity to just remind people of the history behind this debate and sort of just get everyone on the same page as far as, where we are and how things got to be. Not really to change anyone's minds, not in this particular video. So in this video, I'm going to be discussing sort of the history and the arguments present in the debate, and also just kind of going over how you can use these tactics to win debates out in the real world. So even if you just couldn't care less about Exarion Universe or GOAT format or any of this nonsense, I'd recommend sticking around because I'm going to drop, just some tips on how to win debates in general. And I'm definitely not the best debater of all time, but I mean, I was able to convince tens of thousands of people that they'd been thinking about an issue totally wrong almost overnight. And that is never really something that I've been able to do before, and I don't think many other people have either. So I think it's kind of a good just sort of learning opportunity. So the first thing that I kind of realized about how to win a debate is that you have to understand how the other people, how their way of thinking got to be the way that it was. So for example, say you're trying to win some argument on gay marriage, right? Doesn't matter what side you're on, but you're convincing someone to change their way of thinking on gay marriage. A key part of winning that kind of argument is knowing how they got to be on their side of the argument in the first place, because there's a lot of different factors that can make that up. So you might be talking about some particular point that doesn't relate to them at all. So if I'm gonna have that argument with someone, I want to find out a lot about their background, right? How religious are they? What actually is their sexual orientation? What do they do for a living? Do they have gay friends? Were they once harassed by a gay person? Does their community have a lot of LGBT people? And I'm not saying on this particular issue you're gonna change a lot of people's minds. I'm just saying that it is required to understand how they got to what their view is to have any hope of changing. You can't just say oh, well, I know they're on this side of the issue and I know that they're wrong. That won't change anyone's mind. So one of the key facts that shaped how I approached this particular argument in GOAT format was by noticing that the community was fundamentally accommodative rather than democratic. And here's what I mean by that. Here's what I mean by accommodative. Suppose that four friends are deciding where to go to eat lunch, right? And say that three of them decide they want Mexican food, and the other guy says he prefers Italian food. Where should they go to eat? The answer might seem obvious, but reality is you can't really tell. Suppose that the fourth friend can't stand Mexican food and is yeah, not willing to consider that as an option. Now, assuming that Italian food is an acceptable outcome to the other three friends, they might choose to go to an Italian restaurant, even though it's not their first choice, in order to accommodate the fourth person and result in the largest number of people, going out to eat, being happy with their choice, having fun, and so on. So, when the revival of GOAT format first started in 2012, it wasn't really an organized operation. There were some people that wanted to play with Exarion, and some didn't. However, the people who didn't want to play with Exarion Universe kind of felt that it wouldn't be too much of an issue to just let the people who wanted to play Exarion throw it into their decks, right? It was kind of, yeah, whatever. Because generally speaking, it's more difficult to take something away from someone than it is to let other people have something that you don't have, right? So it's harder to tell people, hey, take this card out of your deck, than it is to convince someone, hey, is it fine if this other person has this card in their deck? So the way that we got to start off playing with Exarion Universe was just, hey, we're trying to start this new game. We want to accommodate the maximum number of people. So, we'll not make a big stink about this and just kind of let people play with Exarion if they want to. Now, 3 years later, flash forward from 2012 to 2015, people started to see GOAT format a little differently. It became a bit more popular and was inevitably started to be viewed as more of a competitive experience. So, like, as creating a healthy competitive environment became more of a priority, that changed the way that the community started to perceive the issue. The attitude shifted, like, more from, oh, let's just, sort of allow as many cards as possible to accommodate everyone, more towards, hey, we should like focus on creating the best possible play experience in order to sustain the interest of the game for the long term, right? We know we've already made it 3 years, so let's make it last another 5. And, once we started to sort of enter that transition phase, that's when I saw my opening for making the case for, obviously, what I believe is the best way to play GOAT format, and that's without Exarion Universe. So I had a few things going for me, to convince all these other people that at the time were playing with the card. One was that, like, no one had really, like, sort of formally laid out any arguments yet in favor of either side. It was just kind of based more on, well, this is how we've been doing it, and, changing things would be kind of a bit of an effort. And the other nice thing is, like, the format is only 3 years old, which doesn't really give people, like, a ton of time to form, like, deeply ingrained opinions that just can't be changed. Unlike the gay marriage example that I gave before, where maybe someone's been thinking about something a certain way for 20 years, and it's very hard to undo, like, 20 years worth of thinking. So, like, in any debate, I think sort of understanding, like, the format of the debate is going to determine, like, how you're going to structure your argument. And what I mean by that is, like, a lot of times, like, in the real world, we have, like, a one-on-one debate where you're trying to convince the other person to change your mind. So it's just you versus one other person. They lay out their argument, you lay out theirs, you hope to change their mind. You also have one-on-one arguments where you're not trying to convince the other person to change their mind, but you have a group of observers that you're trying to convince to change their mind. So, like, political debates are an example of this, right? So, like, if Donald Trump is, like, debating, Hillary Clinton on TV. Obviously, Donald Trump isn't trying to get Hillary Clinton to vote for him, right? He's trying to convince all of the other people watching the debate to vote for him. So you're going to, like, structure your argument a little differently as a result of that. This particular debate was, like, neither of those two, however, because I didn't really, like, have a specific person or even people I was, like, arguing with, back and forth. It was more of, like, hey, here's what I think, and I had a large group of observers, and I want to get all of them to, like, come to my way of seeing things, right? So, something important that I've come to realize just philosophically, like, about people is that arguments, like, always deal with emotion first and foremost. Now, like, I know, like, if you were in, debate club in college or whatever, they sort of try to teach you that, like, all arguments should be founded upon, logic rather than emotion. And, like, oh, you should never use, like, an emotional appeal as, like, the core of your argument, because, like, that's not what smart people do. But regardless of, like, what they teach you in college, I've realized this is, like, a terrible strategy for actually changing people's minds. And this is why, like, when you see mathematicians and scientists, like, go on TV to try to change people's minds, they often suck at it. Because, like, they think that, oh, I just lay out the facts and then I win. Well, that's, like, not really how it works. And certainly with, like, the Exarion Universe debate, like, there's no, like, logically right or wrong answer in regards to whether or not, like, you should allow a specific card in a fun format. Like, it's purely an emotional argument. So, like, in order to get people to change their minds on this issue, I was like, okay, I need to sort of understand the values and emotions of the audience. So, like, rather than try to create, like, a logical argument with a few appeals to emotion sprinkled in, I did, like, kind of the opposite. I laid out an emotional argument and then had, like, a couple of appeals to logic to sort of, like, back it up. So, like, in order to make this appeal to emotion, like what you have to do is you have to start with why. And Simon Sinek, who's one of my role models, he talks a lot about this principle in his talks, which I have a link to one of those in the description. So I started my essay by explaining like why we need to have this discussion at all. Like, why should anyone give a shit what I have to say? And then sort of delve deep into like each of the reasons like why we play goat format. And obviously I know that like even if you go read this essay right now, not all of these reasons are gonna like hit home with each individual reader, right? But since I have like a large audience, thousands of people, I want to make sure that I've covered like all of the bases. So it's like, hey, here are all the values that all my readers could possibly have. Let's make sure I address all of them so people don't feel like they've been left out. So like the core values that I tried to appeal to, things that I observed that the GOAT format community held were things like having fun, being intellectually challenged, sort of having a diverse, non-repetitive experience, playing a game that's skillful. And, I sort of went on, one by one, each of these core values and explaining how, like, an Exarion, this GOAT format, better supported those values than the status quo. And, I sort of kept that accommodative history of the community in mind. And, because of how dominant Exarion Universe became in the metagame, I tried to make the point that, like, allowing Exarion Universe really gave people, like, fewer options in a competitive sense, rather than, what we kind of thought originally, which was, might as well let them use it, what's the harm kind of a thing. So I said, given how Exarion Universe sort of makes all of these other cards irrelevant, we can really have, like, a much more diverse, interesting, and accommodative community by deciding to just play without Exarion Universe. And then sort of like I went on to sort of list all of the logical evidence that, supported, the argument that I'm making that, hey, Exarionless Goat supports these values, right? I'd say, and, and here's why it supports these values. Here's the evidence, right? I didn't just say, Exarion Universe makes the format less diverse. I said, here are all the examples of how it, makes the format less diverse, and so on. So, like, as you go and read that essay, if you haven't read it before, you'll notice that, like, the first thing that I do is sort of talk about some particular value that the community holds, like, digest it down into, like, some, concrete tenets, right? What does fun mean? What does skillful mean? What does diverse mean, right? I sort of break it down into things that are a bit less vague, and then sort of take the facts that I have and relate them back to those values, right? So obviously at the end of the day, there was, an overwhelming positive response to what I'd written. It rippled throughout the community and changed, GOAT format for years to come. And 5 years later, the vast majority of the community is, still happy playing without Exarion Universe, definitely still evolving all the time, definitely very interesting. So, I'll just say, if you are on the other side of the issue, if you love Exarion Universe and you're wondering who to blame for all your troubles, I'm the guy you're after. I know there's some people that, are maybe confused and, like, don't understand, like, ooh, why do some people play the game differently? Like, how did this all come to be, whatever. So I hope that by, like, explaining the history behind the issue and how I actually did convince people to change their minds, people can sort of, like, talk about things more intelligently in the future. And, of course I know that, in internet arguments, things sort of tend to go out, in one ear and out the other, but, like, it doesn't have to be like that, right? Like, it is possible to change people's minds. And I will reiterate again, like, there is no right or wrong answer here. So who knows? I mean, maybe someday someone, someone will sort of win the other side of the argument, right? Sort of convince everyone to go back to playing with Exarion Universe. And if that happens, I'm cool with that. And, if that is your mission, I just hope that this video sort of explains to you the kind of arguments that you'll need to address in order to do that. That's all really. Peace out. Share this video, etc., etc. Hope this sort of adds some thoughtful discussion to the whole Exarion debate. Take care.